Okay, thank you, Mary June. At this time, I'd like to ask Kathleen Walker and Tom Fisk to stand, please. Okay, Kathleen, no waving yet. You haven't asked to wave, okay, but we'll get you to wave in a second. Kathleen has recently been appointed by me to be priest in charge of St. David's and Page, and Tom Fisk has just arrived with us to be the new vicar at Grace and St. George. Now we wait. Welcome among us. Okay, so the question that perhaps you're asking is, and I would be asking it certainly, is okay, well that's all well and good, we understand this, what's in front of us. And one of the goals certainly that we've been striving for since 2010, when I first became the bishop here, was to become extremely transparent in our financial dealings. So Finance Committee was given all the documents and more that they needed. There was nothing that was hidden away. And then also as the bishop, I said, well, if the council has oversight over the budget, then that means the bishop really needs to behave in a manner which demonstrates that. So in other words, no financial decision would be made, and then I come to the diocesan council and say, now rubber stamp that for me, would you please? We needed to become as transparent as possible and follow our own canons on how we do business in the Diocese of Utah. And to a large extent, I think we've come a long, long way and have achieved that. You might recall that when I first got here as the bishop, was elected, we had the budget hearing at the diocesan convention, and we would have 100 people go to the budget hearing at diocesan convention. The next year we had about 80 people attend the budget hearing. Last convention we had 2 people show up. Now that, I think, demonstrates that people either have given up on us altogether or said, you know, we think we trust the system now because we know that we can ask questions. And indeed, I've invited people down to the office if they called on the phone and said, would you please explain this to me, please? And we'd say, well, why don't you come in and speak with the CFO? They had concerns, so they would make an appointment and come in. Okay, but the question I would be asking is, okay, so we understand these pieces of information, but what resources are there for congregations? Okay, what resources are there for congregations? Okay. Well, one, in 2018, the diocesan budget has set aside $10,000, the council set aside $10,000 for congregations to pay consultants to help work with them. Okay. In other words, some of this has happened already. St. John's Logan had Mark Clevenger come, St. Paul's of Vernal, and so forth. We've set aside $10,000 for congregations to have a consultant work with them, to work with the Bishops' Committee, the vestry, and so forth. Okay, so that's been set aside. Contact me regarding that if you're interested in that happening. Okay. In 2018, we've also set aside $5,000 to help congregations to send members to the 2018 TENS conference, the Episcopal Network for Stewardship. This will be held April 3 through 5. Last year we sent a number from St. Mary's in Provo. Previous years sent from Good Shepherd and others. We also have the membership in the Episcopal Network for Stewardship. Well, first of all, there is the URL here about the upcoming conference, okay? And then we have the membership in TENS as well, diocesan membership. And what that means is that these resources are available for you to utilize your stewardship campaigns and information on stewardship. The username is Mark with a capital M. It is case sensitive, and the password is 1021, Mark 1021. So that is available to all congregations to utilize those resources. We held the TENS conference here a number of years ago, and a number of you from the diocese attended that conference. Okay. The Diocese of Utah We'll also provide membership in Church Next. Okay, what is Church Next? Church Next is a resource rich offerings of courses of study, videos, and presentations that can be utilized for your adult education, spiritual formation in your congregation. We will provide Church Next for up to 20 members per congregation. So, for instance, if you have a class of 20 people, it would cover that class. Okay. So that means if you run another class of 20 people, that would just transfer to the next group of 20 people. Now, most adult formation classes I've seen don't average over 20. However, you're not being required to do this at all. But we want to make it available in order that you have the resources there to do your formation, help with your formation within the congregations. Okay. We're also helping to send 4 people to the upcoming evangelism conference, and we'll get a report back on that at our upcoming convention, and that is coming up fairly soon. Sending 4 people to the evangelism conference. Rick Felton, the director of the Episcopal Network for Stewardship, will be our main speaker and guest at our upcoming diocesan convention. Rick Felton has also been working with the Cathedral Church of St. Mark. And so he will be our keynote speaker at our upcoming diocesan convention that will be held at Ascension St. Matthew's in Price. So these are some of the resources that are available. And we also have the building there across the way for congregations that have been holding vestry retreats as well. And also that can be a resource. So let's say a congregation says, we'd like to have one of the staff come in and consult with us while we're there. We can do that. If you would like also, for the congregations that are outside of this area, let's say we've made this, you go back home and you say, you know, it really would be helpful if we had the bishop, Canon Nessler, Canon Anderson, come and talk with our congregation as well. We can do that. We can do that. That's a resource also that you may ask us to provide for you. And certainly if Canon Anderson comes up to do that, that would not be a consulting fee on that. So in other words, we can do all these things for you. Now, in addition, the 150th Anniversary Committee it will be sending in their final report from their work. And there are 3 areas that they have selected that they believe we should move forward in this diocese. One is on discipleship and formation, hence the Church Next. One is on new mission initiatives. And one is on evangelism. Okay, now you're probably thinking, well, how are we going to do any of these things? And we'll be speaking about this at convention. When we are already looking at the changes to what's coming financially speaking. And the answer to that question is very simply, the initiatives of the 150th anniversary celebration are coming from the proceeds that we have from the sale of property. In other words, they're simply outside of the budget entirely. The question was asked by a person of the diocese when we first started on the 150th anniversary celebration and endeavors that may come from that. Why can't we utilize those monies from the sale of the property to backstop us with these, with the changes from the trust and the changes from what we can expect as far as income from the trust? The answer is, well, we could, but then in a couple of years we would be back in the same place. So in other words, we kick the can down the road, but we'd be back in the same place without having started anything or tried anything new. And I would rather have new endeavors launch at the same time in order that we could work on those and move forward, rather than simply try to backstop ourselves for 2 years and then being back right where we are today. So that is one of the things that I've been asked, certainly. So these things will be published and more be spoken about at our upcoming diocesan convention. Another resource that is available to you are really each other. I know that some of the bishops' committees and vestries have already been at work at this. How many of you have your bishops' committees and vestries already working and been talking about the changes and things coming? Yeah, they have. So that's good. And the other thing is linking with each other and talking to each other on what you're doing is important. And looking at your local community as well to see what is there. Those are resources that are available, to you. So those are very important things to consider as we move forward together during this whole process. And as I said, we're only on the very front end of it. And so please understand that as you all are thinking, the whole thinking's still going on through council, standing committee, and every other body on what to do. And as I said, although the adjustments were made in large part through the so-called diocese, and where the so-called diocese through council's deliberations will continue investigating that and looking at that to understand what else could we do. And that's an important thing to understand. What else could we be doing, should we be doing to help us in this process in order that really we might reach the point, and I'm hoping, and that's what I'm trying to get us to, we've got a whole growth in parts of our diocese right now, and we can't get there to start or launch new mission endeavors. We just can't, because we can't afford to do it. I'm reminded that before the hospital was ever sold, we did wonderful things. We built a hospital. We didn't say we couldn't do it. We just built a hospital. We started the congregations. They were there before the hospital was ever sold. St. Paul's has been there for a long time. The cathedral's been here for a long time. New congregations started off of other congregations. St. James was started as a mission outreach of All Saints, long before the sale of the hospital. It wasn't a question of what we can't do. It's a question of we can do it. We just got to put our mind to it. Otis Charles started the Episcopal Management Corporation, which was at one time the single largest provider of low-income housing for seniors, which still is in existence today and still doing its work, before the sale of the hospital ever took place, and he garnered resources in order to launch that. Well, now we have over 200 units. But that was all done without benefit of monies from the Perpetual Trust, because there wasn't such a thing at that time. So I'm reminded that at times the best thing for us really is the necessity of having to do something. Because I think necessity is often the thing which drives us to be creative and to think of new ways of approach. And that's where we are really, right now. We are at that point where we really need to be thinking of these things and endeavoring to go into new ways of being. Because I think the opportunities really are quite large that we have in front of us right now. I believe to the depths of my soul that people are hungry. People are hungry for what the Episcopal Church has to offer, because it is unique in many ways. When General Convention was here, for instance, I was speaking with people in the Roman Catholic Church and the LDS Church, and I was describing to them how we actually make decisions at large in the Episcopal Church. And I was telling them that we send deputies to convention, everybody has a voice, and then we vote on these things. And one person said, I think I better join the Episcopal Church. You know what is happening in the culture at large at this time. And you know that the Episcopal Church has been on the forefront in so many ways to provide a voice in this culture which is desperately needed. Right now, the Diocese of Utah represents 1/1000th of the Episcopal Church at large. 1/1000th. And yet we held a general convention, which was reportedly the best convention held in generations. We had more volunteers than any other general convention. We're the smallest diocese to ever do that. 1/1000, and yet they came to us to help them with a major Title IV project that will benefit the whole church. 1/1000th of the Episcopal Church, and yet this diocese has done that. That's really quite amazing. In the state of Utah, we are probably what percentage of the state of Utah? We used to be 1/2 of 1%. We're not that anymore. And yet, the Episcopal Diocese of Utah has an outrageous footprint regarding the legislature and opinion within the state of Utah. Not so much northern Arizona. I never get calls from northern Arizona on matters. But in Utah, it's amazing how much information gets sent from the Diocese of Utah into radio programs, television programs, newspapers, etc., and our opinion is asked on legislative matters over and over again. And we also have Rebecca Chavez Hauk, who is a representative in our legislature. All of these things, and yet we're a small body of people. And we continue moving forward on new endeavors and new ways of outreach all the time. The opportunities are huge, and there are people that want to hear what we have to offer. Just the other day, I was walking to get my lunch at Harmon's. As you know, for some of you who follow me on Facebook, I try to spend no more than $2 on my lunch on any given day. And I've always been cheap. I'm sorry. It just is. I was raised by parents who went through the Great Depression, and so I set this as a goal. And by the way, this is how you do portion control as well. Now then, so I was there at Harmon's, and I was walking down the stairs to the salad bar, and this person stops me as I'm halfway down the stairs and says, Bishop Hayashi. And I'm trying to go, okay, what congregation is this guy from? I know you're something, no, St. Paul's, maybe, no, All Saints, no. I don't recognize this fellow. And the fellow then says, I'm LDS. I went, oh, well, that's good. That means that's not someone I should recognize here. So anyway, so we're talking, and he says, I just want you to know how much it meant to me when you first arrived. So we're talking in 2010. This person remembered this from 2010, when you said that the Episcopal Church would seek to identify itself by being Episcopalians as opposed to being not LDS. He said, I was so grateful for that, because prior to that, so many of the churches seemed to identify themselves against the LDS Church. And I said, well, it's never good to identify yourself by what you're not. It should be what you are. And he said, that meant a great deal to me, because it's helped me, he said, to get over some of the antagonism. So we are 8/100ths of 1% of the Utah population. That's what we are. So when you consider that, my goodness, there's so much available and so much of a need for the type of people that we Episcopalians are. There's just so much of a need for that. And I think the opportunities are huge, and I would like to be able to exercise or get as much of those, take advantage of them as possible. Now, again, one of the things that's important for you to understand is that you do have agency in the decisions that the diocese makes. We have our convention. You heard that that's different than the way the Episcopal Church or the Anglican Church operated. We have that. We have the Diocesan Council. We have the Standing Committee. We have ways in which for you to run, to serve on those bodies. And as you heard from Mary June, what we have in place right now with the targets we're trying to reach was based upon the decision of the Diocesan Council of 2017 and 2018. That can change in 2019 and 2020 because a council cannot limit a next council's operation. You have the possibility of serving on these bodies. They're elected, and as we've been trying to demonstrate repeatedly, I believe, today, is that we really do leave the decisions up to those bodies to make them, to deliberate carefully, to think matters through. Which is why, at this point in time, in addition to the fact that we haven't even begun the budget process yet for 2019, why decisions haven't been made already, because the council needs to carefully consider everything. Exercise your agency, run for these offices. We need good people to help us shape our future together. We need good people. We have good people already. We need continually have more good people continue to serve on these bodies. So please do that. Also look at your own selves to say, what agency do I have within my local congregation and local community? I am continually surprised at whenever I post a photo on my Facebook page of Cheetos, how many people see it. Now, as you know, I used to do the daily post, spiritual reflection post. After 1,750 of those, I kind of got worn out of doing them. But it's amazing to me how many people check in on things that I post. That can be done in your local community as well and become known. Some of you are already doing that and known in the community at large, and I believe that you should start attracting people because of that. We don't attract people in order to get our bills paid. We attract people because we have something to offer, something to give. The Episcopal Church may not be the perfect church. We may not be the perfect church. But as far as I'm concerned, it's the best and fullest representation of what God would want in a church that we have. And we have in front of us this moment in time when we have a need to really be thinking and moving forward into how are we going to do this. It's going to be done through the combined efforts of all of us. It's going to be done through the prayerful deliberation of our governing bodies. And it's going to be done, I assure you, transparently, so you know what's happening. Okay? Now, let us now, I would ask Canon Worth, Craig Worth, our communications director, who has been working in the business of communications, I think, for nearly 50 years. And he's going to get an award on this up in Montana, too, I believe, for 50 years of service. And believe it or not, his Worth Watching is one of the most popular things on TV. So without further ado, as Craig is fond of saying, guess one person came up to him one time and said, "You used to be Craig Worth, didn't you?" So the man who used to be and still is Craig Worth.
Oh, thank you. You know, I woke up this morning and it was 10 degrees in Summit County, and I knew I'd be talking to you because the bishop has always said, it will be a cold day before you ever address this church. And so here I am. And thank you, Bishop. It is cold. Okay, you got all kinds of information. Now, how are you going to use it? What are you going to do to tell it to the rest of your leadership, your congregations, maybe any new vestry or bishop's committee members? Well, the advice is this: you tell it, you explain it, and most importantly, you share ownership. You let whoever you talk to own the message that you're giving it. Don't be subtle. Just as it's happened today, we're all in this together. And too often we tell news to our leadership, to our vestries, to our congregations from our perspective. We don't involve the audience. Make it their news too. And it is just as the bishop and all those who I'm so fortunate to work with, who are devoted to ministry, have done today. Why share ownership? People will rise to the occasion when you share ownership. Often people will see opportunity when they share ownership because it's now their message too. And I think that's been our issue in this church. Many of us have known about the budget. Many of us have known about the ministry, but we didn't share it. We didn't make it the message of the congregations. We didn't make it the message of everyone who walks in through our doors. And connecting means using the language and the frame of reference of each of your stakeholder groups. And that message is distributed in a way they wish to receive the communication. Now, you need to give it to them how they want to get it. It's a big mistake to believe that you have one common message for one giant group. That's because people approach the same message in different ways, such as a financial language, or a language of ministry, or a language of Sunday worshipers who are just in the congregation trying to figure out the Episcopal Church. That's full time, particularly if you try to read that stuff at the back of the prayer book that says this is the Episcopal Church that's been there since 1789. It's different. You need to speak the language of each of the stakeholder groups. Vestry or bishops' committees speak to other members in one language. It's often given in the frame of reference of budgets. And how do you communicate with them? Well, you know from those of you who talk to bishops' committees and vestries, often it's a short email. And of course, discussions at meetings. It is not from a speech from the pulpit. Now, congregational members don't have that frame of reference of budgets. And so if we talk in a frame of reference of budgets, it's going to be kind of unusual to understand. But they know that they give money and they're not sure where it goes, or even that we have a diocese. How do you communicate with them? I tell you, the presentation that Canon Nestler gave, I was back there taking notes. I haven't heard that since confirmation. She did a lot better job than they did up there at Great Falls, I gotta say. Going to stick with this church after that. Anyway, it is true that just to explain what a diocese is, and then you develop that communication. Personal, one-on-one, or addresses from the pulpit are the preferred way of receiving messages in church. We have learned this at the Episcopal Communicators. They've talked about how is it that you tell people in the congregation news you want them to hear. It seems remarkable, but it's from the pulpit is where they wish to hear that information. It gives it a special meaning. Clergy speaks from the frame of reference of leadership and a frame of reference of dealing with the diocese. And how do you distribute information to them? Again, we know there are those who prefer email, but we're learning that the business of communication now includes texting. Texting is becoming a major form of business communication. So text, that's a great way for clergy to talk to clergy. And most importantly, you will all need a consistent message. It is just given in different ways to each stakeholder group. You cannot say one thing to one group and not expect it to be delivered to another. Okay, here's my example. You cannot tell your organist you can no longer pay him or her 25 bucks, so goodbye. And then you tell your vestry, hey, we got great news. We're saving 25 bucks a week. And then you walk out and tell the congregation, we have some very sad news. Our organist is leaving. You see, people are going to talk to each other, and that goes back to what the bishop says. We have to be transparent. The message you give to the vestry even though it's going to be done in a little different way and the way it has to be communicated, is the same message you have to give to the congregation. People are going to talk to each other. Now, it sounds basic, but it's often violated, not just in church. I spent a decade as a reporter at CNBC, and one time I remember we got a statement from General Motors that they had great earning news. They were so excited. We're listening on the phone. That's back in the days you used phones. They said, we're laying off 3,800 people to cut costs in a non-income producing factory. This is great news. And we announced it. Well, the factory workers did a slowdown that afternoon in solidarity to what GM thought of its workers. And GM said, wait a minute, that announcement was only intended for our stockholders. We make that same mistake. We'll tell the vestry one thing, we'll tell congregations something else. What you say will go everywhere. And let's go back to ownership. Let's fine-tune how that's done. Number one, involve your audience. Give them the consistent message and make sure you give them ownership. Now, it could be just in little simple ways. Which sounds better if you ask something like, what do they see as opportunity? Or if you ask, what do we see as opportunity? See, one, you are being very personal about it. Or if you say, you know, you're welcome to give ideas, you're welcome to come to a meeting and learn about what the church finances are. Or you say, I invite you to join me to give ideas. One, you're saying, I'm going to offer you ownership, and one is, listen to my message. And the problem with a lot of congregational meetings is that we have a lot of observers. We do not have a lot of participants. So, you have the notes from the resources from the diocese today. You have the notes about the agency that we all have. And you have the notes about being involved in decision making. Now, how do we turn those observers into participants? I say we ask two fundamental questions. And those fundamental questions are, what do congregations see as opportunities? And frankly, what do they see as challenges? How often do we ask that? What do you see as challenges? And that's normally the way it happens. We leave it at that. But when you are owners of the message, we go further. We honestly can say, how do we facilitate those opportunities and meet those challenges in a dialogue? Not just taking their answers, not just taking their questions, but having a real dialogue. Just as we are sharing with you today, we aren't giving information, we're sharing information. And that message goes with every stakeholder group in ways they wish to communicate. Now, one thing that is across the board with every stakeholder group, and that is when you talk, when you share, have an agenda. That is so important. A written agenda, perhaps for leadership groups, and if you agree, email works. When you ask a question on an email, have an agenda in that email for reply. Here are 3 questions I want to ask you. Here you reply 3 different answers. Even in a general public congregational meeting, have an agenda of 3 or 4 things you're going to be covered at the pulpit. You know, here are 3 things I'm going to talk to you about. Here are 3 things I want you to listen to and 3 things I want you to share. So that agenda becomes the basis of your meeting. And I can tell you, nothing says ownership like finishing agendas. And I guarantee you, when you walk away from today, when you've gone through that whole agenda that the staff of the diocese has put together, and you look at that, you say, you know, that is where ownership comes from. We finish that agenda, we finish that sharing. And in summary, give ownership for the solutions and the opportunities. You have the materials, and they're going to be on a website. In fact, Haley Oliver, who is a genius at putting together websites, amazing. All I do is that I get this text at like midnight. It says, what do you think of this? And I pretend I was awake, and I say, yes, I've been studying that, and you've done a very good job. It's great. But she has done a great job. More importantly, let all know that you're not just giving that information, that you're sharing that information. And in any communication, remember this, the facts can be given. You can quote the bishop. You can quote all the good people that you heard today. But your job as a communicator is not to just give the facts, the quotes, even the sheets of paper. Your job is to give the why we should care. Why should we do the Lord's work? Why should we look for opportunity in the first place? You know, that question, why, is always the most difficult message. It is not of facts. That's why it's difficult. It is of passion. We all can say that we've done and attempted to do the Lord's work for X number of years, in X number of churches, or in X number of roles. But why? Why do any of you, or all of us, do the church work? That is the reason we're here in the first place. And that passion of why is the first thing to communicate to those stakeholders. It's like what you've all heard today. We know the facts. We know now who the diocese is. We know where we are, but why? And if you can successfully communicate why we need to continue to do the Lord's work, if you can successfully communicate why we can find opportunity here, if you can successfully communicate why we did what we did today and why all of you came here today, and why everyone needs to hear the story of Jesus Christ, then we will know why we will have the best years of ministry before us all. And we will. And here are some links and some information, and I encourage you to go to financingthelordswork.org. You realize we own that name now. We own Financing the Lord's Work. Nobody else can do that. Only us. So go out and share the information.
Thank you, Canon Worth. And many of you are looking for an opportunity to discuss all of this with one another. Today's program was designed to lead us into greater awareness of the opportunities and challenges ahead. Some of you may be surprised that we did not allow a lot of time for discussion today or for question asking in person. We who designed the day felt that there was just so much that we wanted to share with you. And we'd like you to take it home with you. We'd like you to read it thoroughly, communicate it, and bring all your questions to our diocesan convention, all your ideas, all your concerns, all your reactions, because at diocesan convention we will have a 90-minute period where the convention will be divided into 10 groups. And that will be about 21 persons, 20 people in each group. And we are going to start the discussion of what we've thought about today, what our concerns are, everything that arises in you from what you have heard today, we will have a chance to share. Each one of those groups will be led by a trained leader, facilitator for the group, and will be further collecting information and ideas, and all of that will be informing the budget process with the Finance Committee and the Diocesan Council as we go forward. So one of the blocks at our Diocesan Convention will be these discussion groups. Another block will be different workshops on topics related to the issues that we are all facing. And of course, we are going to welcome the Executive Director of the Episcopal Network for Stewardship, TENS, to be our speaker And I know that as you hear his presentations, you will get even more ideas about the way forward with all of us. If you are not a delegate or an alternate to our diocesan convention, sign up as a visitor so that you have a chance to be part of these important discussions and of feeding your thoughts into the system we already have in place for making financial decisions. We need to hear from every one of you. Okay? Continue to send us questions. In the back of your folder, there is how to communicate with today's speakers. There's a page on that. Do not hesitate to do that, and we will be happy to post those questions and answers as well to the financingthelordswork.org website. And now I thank you so much for coming. And the thing that I want to do the very most right now is to ask Pastor Jim Locke and others from Ascension St. Matthew's to stand. Jan Young, Alan Young, Don Phillips, and Pastor Jim have been tirelessly working to prepare to welcome us all to Ascension St. Matthew's and to Price. We thank you. Your efforts are amazing. Thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you in about 2 months. And now would you stand as you're able for our bishop's blessing.
Thank you, Canon Nestler, and thank you all for being with us today in order that we could share this information with you, again, because we thought it was so important, and the clergy thought it was so important to call for a meeting of the people from the diocese itself. So, let us join together in saying the Our Father. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And grant safe travel, O Lord, to all of us who will be getting in our automobiles and going back to our places where we find rest and relaxation. Guard all of us safely on that journey, O Lord. Look upon this world that you have made and the things that are happening, and help us to be part of the solution, O God, and to be contributors to the betterment of this world you have given us. And the blessing of God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be upon you and remain with you always. Amen. Amen.